Hi, and welcome to episode 49 of this Chess TDD series. This is where we're going to dive back into castling, and made a bit of progress in this episode, but this is a tough problem to solve, and not making especially fast progress, although I do have, I think, an idea for the next episode, how maybe to make the castling go a little bit smoother. So what I'm starting out with here is fixing what I was wrong about last time that I think I mentioned at the end, or maybe in the post on the blog. The problem being that I was actually wrong about where the move happens to the far side of the board when it comes to castling. The king doesn't move over 3, king moves over 2. So what I'm doing here is I picked a test to get to go red, and that's my reason to change the production code. So I then changed the production code to make that test pass. Now in this case, it's making several other tests fail. And I was anticipating that since there are numerous tests depending on this particular piece of the code. So now I just go back in and correct those tests. And that is a lesson to take away, that you'll hit a situation like that. And it's perfectly fine. If you know that several tests are depending on the same behavior for various reasons and you change that behavior to get, the latest one to go green, well, then you're going to be getting other ones to go red, and that's okay. You can go back and correct those as needed. And what I'm going to do here is go back through and correct the various tests that go wrong as a result of that, or what I did, I should say. So now I'm trying to figure out what to do next. So I've got this mistake fixed, and I'm going to spend a little time here at some point in Trello. I recorded this last night, so I don't remember exactly when, but kind of figuring out what to do next. So I am at now, for real, the stopping point that I thought I was at in the last episode. So, all right, what needs to happen here? The restrictions on castling, for one, need to be in place. So you can't castle if either the rook in question or the king has moved. So that's one restriction. You also can't castle if doing so when you have to move the king 2 spaces, if the space in the middle is threatened by an enemy piece, meaning you would be castling what's called through check. You can't castle through check. So I started out here thinking, okay, let's write a scenario where we're trying to castle through check. And then I started to think, I haven't defined the concept of check yet in this game, and it might make more sense to implement check first and get some tests around that and some clarity on that behavior, and then say the king can't castle through check. So this is where I think I kind of started to reason about how to implement this and looking at the different methods I had available. I think somewhere there's a concept of threatening. Is capture allowed? So there's stuff here talking about capture, and I was refamiliarizing myself with this code. Can I make use of this concept of capturing? Because that's sort of at the heart of check. In theory, a check move is where you're saying, yes, this piece can capture the king. But it turns out, if you'll recall, this stuff around capture was mainly to start teasing out the weird move concept of pawn, to where pawns can capture if they're moving diagonally, but not if they're moving straight. So this isn't really going to be particularly valuable for the rest of the pieces, because right now, say for rook, is capture allowed will be true at any destination, even if the rook isn't allowed to move there. So I decided to, number one, not actually try to make use of this method for the concept of check. And then also number two, you'll see in a second here, I back away from this and I go to the Trello board and say, okay, let's slay a smaller dragon first, which, for instance, it's fairly straightforward to implement in this code base that the king can't castle if the king is moved, because there's just a flag on the piece that says, have you moved? And in fact, I had that flag in the king's movement already to say that if the king or if the king is moved, then the castle moves aren't available. So this is really going to be just double checking using the unit tests at a granular TDD level that this is in fact correct. And I think also probably I'm going to want to get an acceptance test around that behavior. Right now, the only reason I implemented that in king, which is a pretty granular low level concern, was because I believed that I was going to see other tests go red if I didn't. So here I am organizing things, and I'm going to say, let's prevent, first I'm putting the cards in here, then I'm going to force rank them. And I want to say, the first thing to do is to prevent castling if king or rook has moved. And just kind of, I guess as a spoiler or what have you, the episode gets a little long. So in the interests of keeping it not too long, I wound up implementing castling not being possible if the king is moved, but not quite yet for the rook. So what you'll notice here, there's actually a black dot, which means that return valid one square away is not covered. That indicates I might have been wrong in my hypothesis that I needed the has moved flag in order to prevent tests from breaking. And if that's the case, I remember telling you in the last episode that I was essentially gambling on this and doing some what you might call premature optimization, as it turns out, if that's true. I did a little poking to see if maybe the tests just weren't the testing questions, because look and notice that I'm returning an I enumerable. So it may just be that the tests that would be broken aren't enumerating this list or something. I poked at that a little bit, but the lesson here is, if this is true, if this is an uncovered square, then I made a mistake. I did the wrong thing. I thought the tests would go red, so I threw the flag in and thought, well, I'm kind of advanced with this, so I don't need to verify that assumption. Turns out not to be the case if that is in fact not exercised anywhere. So you can jump the gun no matter how experienced you are doing this. Okay, so back to what I'm actually doing in terms of the code. I'm setting up something here to say that it should not return the square with x coordinate of 2 less in the case of king having moved already. So I can express this nicely in the testing around king itself. All I really need to do here is set the target's has moved to be true and then make an assertion about what's going on. Now, I'm going to get a little bit crossed up here. Now, what you're seeing is a product of my rustiness when it comes to the C# language. I actually have a couple of contracts that I'm working on coming up where I'm going to get to do some C# coding. So hopefully, assuming this series goes on for another month or two, depending on my bandwidth, you might start to see me get a little less rusty with some of the coding concepts. So basically what's going on here, the mistake that you're seeing, is that I am setting this class level property to the result of this method. And what I should be doing is just having this return moves from 5-1 be a property that returns the target get moves from at the time. So to put it another way, what I'm trying to debug here and I eventually figure out is that in the initialization, so I instantiate target and then I get moves from, and then I'm actually just storing the moves. So even though I change a flag on target, I'm getting the old moves from before I change the flag, and it takes me a little while to figure that out. I thought, you can confuse yourself when you're returning enumerable, or I enumerable, because one thing to bear in mind about that is that I enumerable it's easy to think of that as a collection or list or something, but it's actually, you're getting back a strategy for items being supplied. When something returns I enumerable to you, you can have deferred execution behind that I enumerable, which means that you may in fact get back a list, but you also might get back just a method for enumerating through a list. So it's like, here, go do this and cycle through the database, and that's how you get your enumerable or enumeration. Anyway, long and short of it is, it took me a minute to figure this out, and if I were a little sharper on my game, I probably wouldn't have. But what I really should be doing is have moves from 5-1 be a read-only property, and the implementation is return target.get moves from. That way, I'm getting the latest moves and not the moves that were relevant at the test initialization. So I don't remember exactly how long it took me to figure that out, but that was part of the reason I didn't get quite as much done here as I would have liked. Interestingly, as an aside, it's a chance to see something I haven't seen before, which is that I'm here in the debugger. It's showing me all this cool stuff. I have the enterprise version here that I'm using. It's showing me all this cool stuff about the memory footprint and whatnot. So they're baking a lot more stuff into each iteration of Visual Studio. And just conversationally, I'm actually pretty happy with the new Visual Studio 2015. There's growing pains in who moved my cheese with anything that's new, but I've experienced very little of it with Studio 2015. So I am pleased. I like the source control information above each method. Having that right at my disposal is pretty handy. So I believe I had figured out, so I'd kind of written and tested a hypothesis that I thought would get this green, that the problem was really with my test setup, which led me to the eventual implementation you're going to see here. I kind of roll back on it, and I want to get this test going green by changing the way this works. So this is what I meant before. Instead of this being a variable, I'm going to turn this into a property that is a wrapper for returning target get moves from. So I can keep the naming in the shorthand, but do things to the target class that actually matter. Forget what was wrong here. Oh yeah, compiler error because of that period. So that should get it to go green, and then I had turned off the dot coverage for everything for debugging, and now I see that yes, all the tests are still green. So I believe I came and also just confirmed this to the other side, I want to say. 2 more then, so I think it's worth putting this test in. Maybe not, but it can't hurt, in my opinion, to say, like, well, I don't want to allow myself a situation where I'm only restricting one of these castling moves. If the king is moved already, then neither one of the castling scenarios should be available. And fully expect this test to also go green because of the implementation that had already existed with the has moves flag. And, I'll state this again. I've probably said this any number of times already, but it's perfectly acceptable to write tests that go green. Not every new test you add to the code base has to go red. You can bolster up your test coverage. You can document a new requirement that maybe you've already implemented because, maybe you're getting more specific, or maybe you got the code in a certain way as the product of another test, but you want to be more explicit about the behavior, whatever the case may be. And finally, it might be even that you're just confirming your understanding of the code. And as long as you're doing that, if you're writing a behavior that a test doesn't already exist for, and you want to see what happens with that behavior, by all means, document that with a test that you leave in place. Because if you're wondering how it behaves, it's perfectly reasonable to think that somebody else might wonder how it behaves in that same scenario later. So you might as well leave the test in there if it's a test that explains behavior that ought to take place. So now I want to move on from testing the king piece and test the behavior at the board level. So I'm thinking I can drive this still with a unit test even without going up to the acceptance test level. So I'm taking a look at another context-dependent board test class, and I'm going to, as has become customary, describe the test context in the name of the class, and then have this initialization of target, and then start making assertions. And this is where I want to do things like, let's get the board set up, and it's just going to be, as you can see here, given white king and rooks only. So I'm going to put the white king on the board. I'm going to put a rook in each corner, and then start making some assertions about what happens with that initial board setup. So the first thing, I could make the assertion, and maybe I'll add it later if I think of it, that castling should be an option when nothing's moved. But I've got my mind focused on this notion of restricting the castling movement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and add the pieces. I'm just kind of referencing what I'd done in the past here, because keep in mind, as I say a lot, I'll write some code here and then come back a week or two later and do that, indefinitely. So it's kind of like, in a way, being in break fix mode on code you haven't looked at for a while or something. It's like I'm in a perpetual state of being a maintenance programmer on my own code, even though I'm the only one contributing. Anyway. So that's why you see me going back and referring to things like that. So here I am. I'm going to add the 2 rooks and then the king and start to make assertions about what happens next. I'm not going to do any movement in the test setup for that reason, because I may want to make assertions about what's true when nothing's moved. But here I'm going to move the king and then I'm going to move it back, which is to simulate the situation where, this would be an easy non-happy path scenario. Like, hey, so if you had implemented this by just saying, like, is the king in its starting spot and is the rook in its starting spot, then we should be able to castle. I'm trying to test with that in mind and make sure that I'm getting the implementation right. So what I'm doing here for readability is I'm going to define some read-only properties with implementations where I'm going to say king start and then I think king move, I called it. Basically, rather than having these, magic numbery board coordinates in here, I want to be explicit about what I intend for them so the tests read more like prose. And you can see that I'm rusty here. I cannot for the life of me figure out that I need... Oh, there we go. Okay, so this is what I mean. I'm going to do a little bit of changing here how I'm going to go about getting this test to be green. So instead of that, I'm going to say let's move to king start. And then I'm going to move king start to... And I think this was the point where I said, well, if I'm going to have king start, let me have this other thing as well. So this is going to be king move. And remember, everything I'm doing here, I'm writing a test that I fully expect to go green, but I am writing this test in order to confirm my understanding. So if you're wondering why I'm doing this refactoring, I don't actually have a red test. Before I started all this, I was green. So I'm in a position where I can sort of shuffle the test code around and keep everything green, so that's okay. Now I've moved the king, and then I've moved it back, and I want to assert, or first I want to get all the moves available to me from the king's position, and then I want to assert that the castling move is not available to me. And I believe, because of the implementation of has moved that exists in the king class, that this should go green. Now, at this point, it's almost 20 minutes into the episode, so I had my eye on the clock while writing the code, and I was thinking, oh, maybe I can also, check if the rook has moved. But that's not trivial. Right now, all the logic about has moved is occurring inside of the king. So there's no... Basically, the king restricts itself, so there's no logic going on in board that has anything to do with castling. And so once I figured that out, realizing that I was about 20 minutes in already, I called it a day and started walking back what I was trying to do. Don't really remember exactly why I was having trouble here. I did notice one thing while I was recording this code, and actually another project I may be starting on in terms of recording my coding, is that it seems as though Visual Studio is not including like system.link by default or something anymore. I've had to go and mess with the includes at the top. Usings. Too much language switching. But anyway, so here I start to write the next test. And this one I expect to go red. So I'm going to say king rook start, and I'm going to return the rook on the king side, which I believe is 8-1. And then I'm going to just arbitrarily say, let's move this rook up 1 to 8-2. And that will be its first move, and then we'll move it back. So same exact thinking as with the king. And what I want to do is move the rook, then move it back and make the same assertion. So now let me do a bit of refactoring because I'm still green at this point. And I'm going to say, we'll call this king rook start. And I guess if we're going to test the queen rook later, we might do the same thing there. But I wasn't too worried at this point. So I believe I got as far in the next minute or so as writing this test, and then I saw it was really getting late, so I stopped and shuffled the Trello board around. We're just about done here. So as you can see, let's move the king, rook up 1, and then we're going to swap and move it back. And do the same thing as above and get the king's moves. And after that, make the same assertion. The king, with that rook having moved, should not be able to castle to the king's side. Now, what I'm expecting is that this is going to go red, and yes, that's true. So because there is nothing in board or anywhere that goes looking at whether the rook has moved or not in terms of allowing this. So again, this is not native to king, which is going to make it hard. Now, there's probably something obtuse I could do here to get this test passing, but I decided to back up, comment out the test because I didn't want to deliver code to up to GitHub with failing tests. But I need to be done. I'm trying to be really good about capping these around 20 minutes. So comment that out so I'm still green. And then I'm going to, I don't know why I did that. I think I didn't mean to. I was just looking to commit the code. And then square with Trello and call it an episode. So I do have an idea I'd like to explore next time for maybe getting a little more deliberate about the castling and seeing if I can't make it easier. So tune in next time and you'll get to see me flail away at that. Thanks for watching.